Rainbow Six Siege released on December 1st, 2015. The game released with these operators and these maps in the ranked pool. The game was released in a buggy state and would disappoint a lot of players, mainly because of the stark difference between the advertising showing the game as a more tactical experience and the gameplay being nothing like the trailers. Ubisoft would be battling with these perceptions for years, and these perceptions hurt the game so badly that it basically failed on release. There were very few players, but Ubisoft decided to commit to developing it because they felt it could bounce back. And around this time, there wasn't much of a meta. The main thing was that players wanted to play operators on defense with good guns and an ACOG. So Jaeger, Bandit, and Doc were extremely popular. And on attack, Ash was by far the fan favorite for the same reasons. However, there wasn't much of a meta to discuss other than the default stuff, like bringing Thermite for the walls and Thatcher to get rid of bandit batteries. Year 1 of Siege's post-launch content brought Operations Black Ice, Dustline, Skull Rain, and Red Crow. These seasons brought the meta towards teams constantly running camera-related operators and the attack running IQ to counter it. Also, since Valkyrie's cameras could be thrown outside, if the attack didn't bring IQ, the defense could be able to run out and get basically free kills. Also, around this time is when Glaz started to become super meta on attack as well. This is because Glaz got some changes that made his scope have thermal capabilities, and that made it easier for him to see through smoke. This meant that people started to use him in combination with smoke grenades to help him get plants down, and this strategy would get stronger in year 2. Year 2 brought Operation Velvet Shell, Health, Blood Orchid, and White Noise to the game. These seasons thrusted the game into a trap meta. This is because Blood Orchid brought both Ela and Lesion into the game. Lesion's mines were released in a completely broken state, allowing him to see all his traps through walls, meaning he got free info, and his T5 SMG was extremely popular. However, this did not compare to Ela, whose gun was completely overpowered, and her mines completely disoriented any attackers that set them off, allowing you to get free kills. So it wasn't uncommon to see an enemy team with an Ela, Lesion, Jaeger, Bandit, and Valk on defense around this time. This year also started Ubisoft's balancing philosophy of revoking ACOGs. They removed Jaeger's and Bandit's ACOG in Blood Orchid, and they continue to do that for years to come. Now, the attackers meta mainly stayed the same at the end of year 2. IQ was still important, and so was Glaz. However, Ying was now in the mix, and she was being brought alongside Glaz often due to her available smokes as a secondary, and due to her Candelas being strong for overwhelming the defense to cover a plant. However, year 3 was about to take the meta and flip it entirely on its head. With year 3, Ubisoft released Operation Chimera, Parabellum, Grim Sky, and Wind Bastion. Chimera was by far the most influential of these. Firstly, Chimera started the continual Ela nerfs and would cause her to eventually become extremely useless. However, the main thing was the addition of Lion. Lion completely broke the game because he literally gave his team blatant wall hacks with a click of a button. This allowed him to combo well with other tracking operators like Dokkaebi, since the one counter to Lion was to stand still. So if you brought Dokkaebi, you'd be able to hear them when they did so. So the attackers turned into a rushing powerhouse, bringing Ying, Dokkaebi, Lion, and Glaz, and it basically became extremely annoying to play defense. You basically had to play Smoke, Jaeger, and Echo if you wanted any chance of stopping these plays, and that's if you were lucky. This was by far the most attacker-sided meta in Siege history, and luckily this meta would be stopped pretty aggressively in year 4. Also, something else worth noting is that year 3 also brought Cade into the game with Operation Wind Bastion. While it was at the end of the year, Cade still had a massive effect on the game and altered how sites were defended going forward, since he could electrify hatches and multiple walls at once. Year 4 brought us Operation Burnt Horizon, Phantom Sight, Ember Rise, and Sifting Tides. The year started off strong because Burnt Horizon absolutely obliterated Lion, causing him to no longer be the meta powerhouse he once was. Also, later in year 4, Glaz would get nerfed to the ground as well, leaving his scope basically useless and killing his pick rate. These two changes would throw the attacker meta out the window, and the end of year 4 would shift the defense side significantly. This is because Ember Rise added Goyo, who had 2 deployable shields with fire canisters on the back, and Shifting Tides added Wamai to the game. This allowed the defense to stack Goyo, Wamai, and Jaeger together to start the utility or 60-second meta. This meta basically entirely revolved around the defense bringing as much utility as possible and protecting it with Jaeger and Wamai. This meant that the attackers had to bring Zofia, Ash, and as much flashbangs as possible in every single round, because at this time, Jaeger could stop 3 projectiles per ADS, 9 total, and Wamai could block 6. So you had to bring as much flashbangs as possible to have any chance of destroying the defense's shields, Maestro Evil Eyes, or other bulletproof utility. This was an extremely defender-sided time to be playing Siege, and year 5 would make some changes to hopefully fix this. Year 5 gave us Operation Void Edge, Steel Wave, Shadow Legacy, and Neon Dawn. The beginning of this year would throw the game deeper into the utility meta. This is because Steel Wave brought Melusi, who had her Banshees, which were completely bulletproof, meaning that the attackers had even more that they had to deal with when it came to bulletproof utility. This meant that Steel Wave was probably the most miserable the attackers had been in a really long time. The only nice thing they got was the addition of Ace, who could open walls way more effectively than anything else they had at the time. But since Melusi was in such a broken state, alongside Wamai and Jaeger still being strong, it was extremely difficult to even enter the map, let alone get the plant down. However, after Steel Wave, Ubisoft would switch up the meta heavily. Firstly, Shadow Legacy added secondary hard breach charges, the 1.5x site, ping 2.0, and the reinforcement pool changes. These were all massive influential changes, and there was much more in Shadow Legacy that I haven't mentioned. However, by far the biggest change in all of Year 5 was the rework to Jaeger in Neon Dawn. This rework made his gadget function the way it does today, by recharging after every destroyed projectile. This killed the already dying utility meta. However, killing it would have unforeseen side effects and would cause the game to go into the most aggressive and brainless meta it had ever had. In Year 6, Operation Crimson Heist, North Star, Crystal Guard, and High Caliber would be released. The main notable changes in this year were the addition of the Gon 6 and Crimson Heist, and the nerfing of Zophiism 762 recoil. Now you may be wondering, why would the nerfing of our random operator's recoil affect the game? Well, this nerf was so bad that it made the gun unusable, and it caused many players to try out her LMG. This made the entire fanbase realize how strong LMGs had gotten. I haven't really talked about it much, but throughout the past 3 years or so, Ubisoft had been levying a ton of stat nerfs to fan favorite weapons, so the strength of weapons had been slowly diminishing over time. However, Ubisoft hadn't been nerfing LMGs, so their power in comparison to other weapons had increased. So when you combine that with the fact that they just nerfed utility to the ground, you got one of the worst metas we've ever seen on the attack, where every attacker with an LMG became picked every single match. And on the defense, their win condition by the end of this year was just bringing as many 1.5s as possible. 1.5s could carry an operator. An operator could have a terrible kit and a bad gadget, but a weapon with a 1.5 could make them strong enough to justify picking. The game basically became about lethality and not utility, and this would last through the following few years as well. Year 7 probably had the smallest effect out of any year in the game's history when it came to balancing. This is mainly because the meta stayed pretty much the same the whole year. We got the introduction of Operation Demon Veil, Vector Glare, Brutal Swarm, and Solar Raid. The biggest thing that happened this year was the addition of Azami and Demon Veil, the addition of Impact EMPs, the LMG rework and the muzzle changes in Brutal Swarm, and the addition of Rank 2.0 and Solace in Solar Raid. However, these changes just reinforced the already extremely invasive TDM meta. While the LMG nerf was nice, nothing was done about the problems with the 1.5. And when you combine that with a new rank system that no longer causes losing to be punishing, it led to players playing the game without the strategy entirely. Also, Solace did not help with this at all, since she punished attackers for doing what they should do, droning. So many just stopped trying to use strategy altogether, choosing to prioritize getting kills instead. And it was not fun, and it would cause many players to hope that Year 8 would bring something more substantial to bring back Siege to its original principles. Year 8 brought Operation Commanding Force, Dread Factor, Heavy Metal, and Deep Freeze. The biggest changes in this year was the removal of the reload canceling in Commanding Force, both the Grim buffs and the addition of Fenrir and Dread Factor, the Legion rework and Quick Match rework in Heavy Metal, and the Grenade rework in Deep Freeze. The Grenade rework was by far the most effective at stopping one of the most annoying playstyles that had ever been around in Siege for years. The Grenade rework was by far the most effective and probably the most influential in all of these changes. This is because the rework removed cooking entirely, which meant you could no longer kill a defender through the floor, which was a welcome change. Also, the Grim buffs were nice as well because it turned one of the weakest attackers in the game to a meta one overnight. However, the overall meta was still the same. 1.5 still dominated and players were still playing extremely aggressively. The reload cancel mechanic being removed did help, but it didn't kill the meta at all. And Year 8 kind of just caused the meta to continue coasting the way it was throughout the entire year, with maybe just a few operators coming in and out of the spotlight throughout. Year 9 was a pretty big year for bringing the game into the direction it is today. In this year, we got Operation Deadly Omen, New Blood, Twin Shells, and Collision Point. The most notable changes in this year included the ADS speed nerf, the shield rework, the impact grenade nerf, the changes to the magnification sights, and the Azami rework in Deadly Omen, the barbed wire buff, the Solace nerf, and the Fenrir rework in New Blood, the second Solace nerf in Twin Shells, and the addition of Blackbeard and the Flashbang nerf in Collision Point. Now, what did all these changes contribute to? Well, on the attacking side, it led to a shield meta becoming extremely prevalent in the game as the year went on. And when Blackbeard was added, it made things even worse since he was by far the strongest shield in the game. This forced the defenders to bring counters to those shield operators if they wanted to perform well. Also, the changes in Deadly Omen to magnification sights removed the 1.5 meta that had become so pervasive on the defense, and instead players just went after ACOGs and shotguns instead. On top of these operators, players also had to bring counters to shields, as I mentioned earlier, so this meant operators like Legion, Smoke, Malusi, and other trap-related operators that could slow the shields down. This was definitely a step in the right direction since Solace was basically useless now, and players were now forced to focus more on strategy. But the shield meta being introduced was hated by many, and it would stay all the way up until today. Year 10 being the year we are currently in means that all the seasons have yet to be released. At the time of recording, we are in Operation Daybreak or Siege X, Operation Prep Phase being the previous season. What we have gotten so far is all of the features in Siege X basically, since Prep Phase didn't really do much on the balancing side. Siege X brought the audio rework, rappel rework, operator bands rework, and the visual overhauls to maps. So as you can tell, we are still currently dealing with the meta established in Year 9 for the most part, that being a meta entirely focused around shields. The operator ban changes in Siege X did help a lot to change things up, since now teams can ban the operators you're comfortable with and can do things like ban all the hard breachers. So this means that the meta is a lot more strategy focused since you have to adapt to what the enemy team is banning. However, shields are still extremely oppressive and they are kind of the foundation of the entire meta. You may love it, you may hate it, but that's just how it is right now. So, and it likely will continue to be the case for at least a decent while. Anyways, that about wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed today's video, I make these content at least twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. Now, if you want to watch another video just like this one, a video will be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace